Hello, spiritual seeker. This is Deepa Lu, and I'm the creative mystic. And I ring this bell to awaken you to the divine presence within you. All right? It's so important to actually remember that we're a divine presence. And today I want to talk to you about spiritual growth, what it is, and why it's so important to you. Because as a spiritual seeker, as maybe your own mystic, maybe you even consider yourself a creative mystic now and didn't know it before is, spiritual growth is something, if you're a spiritual seeker, that people talk about a lot. But do you actually know what it is for you? Do you actually know how to recognize when you're growing spiritually? Because what I find a lot of times with spiritual seekers is that, when they get on the spiritual path, they have all these great aspirations to be more loving and joyful and peaceful. And when they're not, they can judge themselves and even maybe beat themselves up verbally on the inside. And so, it's kind of like important to start to recognize, are you growing spiritually? Are you making progress? Because I do find that most of us are kind of have a blind spot with ourselves. In fact, I say that with all my coaching clients that everybody has a blind spot at some level because we all do. But especially in sometimes, being able to recognize when we're growing spiritually. And sometimes people will think that spiritual growth means, okay, I'm sitting down every day and I'm meditating and I'm doing my spiritual practices every day, every morning, every evening, whatever that definition is for you. It might be that I, sit down just in the morning or just in the evening, but that, that means I'm growing because I'm doing it. And I always talk to people about how, like consistency is really important. I'm somebody who does a morning practice and evening practice every day, and I've been doing it for numerous years. Um, but I don't tell everybody else that you have to do a morning and evening practice. I'd say that it's important to develop a practice and have some consistency in it. And I do recommend, if you can, do something every day. Now, here's the thing: the something every day might not look exactly the same because sometimes you have to work with yourself to that own like inertia, maybe not wanting to get up, or the part of you that can see that, wow, I'm starting to feel a little bored, and if you've been on the spiritual path, you know that there's points in your spiritual practice that for me, it hasn't felt, that I've never felt bored, but I have felt like it's not giving me the amount of joy that it has in the past, or maybe I'm feeling kind of like I'm in doing it out of habit rather than, why we're really doing it, which is to like, have a divine experience. And that's the thing about being a creative mystic. It's about having your own direct experience of the divine presence, whatever that divine presence that you call it, whether it's Buddha, Allah, the universe, spirit, it doesn't matter what name, but it's a matter of that you're looking for that personal experience of that higher power. Now, I like to call that higher power divine presence because that kind of encompasses lots of different names, and you get to choose which one you want to use. But spiritual growth is so important to be able to recognize it for yourself, because if you don't notice that you are having some growth, you can get discouraged from continuing on the spiritual path. You can stop doing your spiritual practices because if it's you're not recognizing that you're having growth, you're going to think it's not working. And I hear that from people all the time, when they've been on that spiritual path a while, or maybe even not that long, but they're starting to do it, and maybe they do it for 6 months, and then they feel like, oh, it's not working, and then they give up because they go, oh, well, I don't see any, I don't see myself growing. So it's not a matter of just doing the act of meditation, or maybe you chant, or maybe you have some other form of practice of prayer. There's all kinds of practices you can do, but it's about doing the practice and then helping yourself become aware of the growth that you're having. So one of the ways that you do that is you go out into your life and go, how are things going compared to before? So it could be that when you first started your spiritual practices, maybe you were more impatient, and now you're more patient rather than impatient. It could be that maybe you were always anxiety ridden, all day long, and you notice like, wow, for like the hour in the morning after I do my morning practices, I don't feel anxious. Now, you might still have anxiety throughout the day, but you notice that 1 hour you don't have it. And so it's really about how do you create the level of awareness? And that is one of the first signs of spiritual growth, is to have the awareness to notice, where you're growing spiritually. Um, Notice, more opportunities around you. Notice the blessings that are coming with things that maybe you don't like, but yet you see the positive in it, because that can happen a lot of times. There can be something that shows up in your life, you don't like it, but you go, oh, I see why Divine Mother's bringing this to me. And so the initial of not liking it, doesn't stay with you, because you start to understand that, oh, I see the benefit now. So that fact that you are even aware of that fact that you dislike something and you caught yourself to see, okay, wait a minute, let me look at this from a different perspective, that's a sign of spiritual growth. And so there's these 8 aspects of the divine presence that I've talked about before. It's peace, calm, joy, love, wisdom, power, divine light, and divine sound. All of those are aspects of what we call God, the universe, divine presence. But when you cultivate those particular aspects and you start to see them within yourself more, then that's a sign of spiritual growth. And so it's about, how do you sit down with yourself and actually get honest of where you are right now? Because one of the biggest things I learned when I got onto the Buddhist path was that, like, people would judge people about, oh, because of the way they were being and how they're, this and this and this, and they would, say negative things about the person. And one of the biggest things I learned when I first got into Buddhism was that, you one, you want to let go of the judgment, because of the fact, who are we all to judge? But most of all, is a way to remove yourself from that judgment, is that you don't know how they used to be. Like, someone's on the spiritual path, and sometimes you go to spiritual places and people will go, oh, they're not, they're not acting very spiritual, because maybe they're grumpy about something or impatient about something. But the thing is that you don't know, maybe, they were impatient with everybody, and now they're impatient only 50% of the time with 50% of the people they meet. And so it's important to, like, just realize that they may have made tremendous spiritual growth, but because maybe you don't know them or didn't know them for very long, you don't know. Or if you're of the mindset, and this is one of the biggest things that I talk about with my individual coaching clients, is that we often have been all programmed with the idea of, like, what's lacking in our life, what's not working. And so we approach life that way. And the tendency is to, rather than looking at what's really happening that's, positive and uplifting or good, or that you could see where it's going to be eventually bringing you someplace positive, uh, that, we have to learn to shift from that perspective of seeing the negative and coming to the positive. So the more you do that, the more you're growing spiritually. So I mention a lot of these things because I want you to sit kind of with yourself and start to be able to recognize them. But the important part of the spiritual growth is first determining where you are right now, so that you can start to recognize when you're having it. Because if you're always basing your spiritual growth on the loftiness of perfection, of, like, I have to be peaceful all the time, I have to be joyful all the time, I have to be loving all the time, and you aren't that all the time, which is the average person, is not successful in the beginning to do that. All the time. And so, I mean, I'm not that way all the time, so you have to start to recognize, gee, do I have improvement of how much peace I have compared to what I used to have, or how much more loving I am, or joyful I am, or maybe I've cultivated my wisdom where I'm not, making the same old choices that I was making before. So there's a multitude of ways to pick this up by, more than I can put in one episode, but I want you to just start to think about this, about, okay, where am I now? Let me kind of write it in a journal. I tell people that way you have something to go back and look at. And then, it's really about checking in with yourself on a regular basis, if not daily. I mean, obviously, if you can do it daily, it's even better. But I know that in my life, sometimes daily is hard when it comes to checking in with where am I growing spiritually. But maybe you can do it weekly or at least once a month to kind of check in with yourself of where have you grown, and actually acknowledge that growth, and give yourself some like pats on the back or hugs or something that you can realize like, wait a minute, I'm actually doing a good job here. Because when you start to focus on that you're actually making progress, it'll help you to stay on the spiritual path, stay doing your spiritual practices, even if like you see a few days or a trend of like you're feeling a little bit more like, oh, this is getting to be like a routine rather than the inspiration it used to be. And so now I want to talk to you a little bit about why it's so important for you to have spiritual growth, because a lot of times people might be thinking, well, or if they haven't been consciously thinking about it, you know, they don't understand maybe why their life feels um, like you have lack of meaning, or maybe you feel conflicted a lot, or like something's missing. And so the reason why it's so important to have spiritual growth is because you're actually hardwired for growth. You're hardwired for expansion. Until you're dead in a box, you're supposed to be growing in some way. Now, that might be different and in different time periods in your life, but you're meant to be growing. And spiritual growth is so important because you actually came here on the planet with a purpose, with a meaning. And as you grow spiritually, it can help you step into that purpose. It can help you to step into the meaning that's been missing. So if you're feeling like something's really missing in your life, or you feel conflicted a lot, or anxiety ridden, or maybe frustrated, uh, all of those are signs that you haven't been really focused on your spiritual growth, because spirit, the universe, divine presence isn't trying to make you miserable in your life. When challenges come, when you feel anxious or conflicted or frustrated with your life, it is spirit in some form, your spirit guides, higher power, talking to you that it's time for a change. It's time to do something new to help you step into your next step of growth, of expansion. Oh no. Oh, oh no, I'm fine. Okay. So So when you are feeling frustrated, or like something's missing, or maybe you're having anger or frustration or anxiety, or feeling like kind of bored in life, all of those are the higher power trying to get you to see that there's a next step for you to step into, to expand into. Could be the next step in your purpose, could be the next step in your spiritual practices, could be the next step in what you're doing out in your career, but there's a next step. And if you aren't actually stepping into this next stage of growth, this next level of maybe something you're supposed to do in your business, life will get harder. It's the biggest thing I've seen throughout my life is whenever I wasn't listening to the inner guidance of the divine presence, kind of trying to lead me down the way I'm supposed to go, life would get hard. And so, and I still now I catch it much earlier. Now, when I was younger, but way back when I was in my 20s, when I was on the spiritual path, but trying to like um, buy a house and get a career going. I wanted to buy a house before I was 30, and I would hear from friends and people I knew that, oh, I should go into outside sales, but I didn't want to do it. I was too afraid because of the fact that you know sales, it was means commission, and I wanted to have that secure paycheck, and so then I made this decision. Okay, I'm going to buy a house before 30. I don't know how, but I'm going to start saving money, saving just this little bit of money. And then, even though friends would tell me to go into sales, I wasn't going to do it because I had this salaried position. I wanted to keep making the money. And then what happens? The company starts having problems and I get laid off. Now I was crying and I was upset, because life was getting hard. But it was really, like spirit trying to push me in the direction of getting that sales job because I wanted that, house before I was 30 and I was never going to get it having that job I had. I was a marketing person where I got paid a decent salary, but it wasn't enough to buy a house in California, which is where I was living at the time, which was and it still is one of the most expensive housing markets around. And so I had to get laid off, which was something I disliked. And at first really did not, feel good about it. I thought it was messing up my plan. And so I just kept interviewing for marketing jobs and not getting it and still having friends say, you should go for this, go get in sales. It took me about, I think it was 3 or 4 months of being off, laid off and going through several interviews of not getting the job. I'd go through several interviews and I'd be like maybe in the last 2 candidates and they'd pick someone else. And so finally I was at a point where when a friend said, I know this sales manager that's looking for a sales rep, why don't you go talk to him? At least you'll be working. Now, granted, at that time, I did not need money. The unemployment and everything I was getting was enough for me to pay all my bills. That's a whole nother story how that miracle happened. But anyway, so I, was, going for the jobs, not getting them. Finally, when my friend said that, I thought, what have I got to lose? Let me go and interview. And I went and interviewed with the woman and she hired me on the spot. And what happened was I got into sales, ended up loving it. And within a couple years was making 2-3 times the amount I used to make in the other job and put the down payment down on my house when I was 28. And so that taught me to even when something I don't like happens, that Divine Mother has my back and it's for a good reason. Now my programming would catch me and at first I'd always be like, I don't like it. And still that can still happen in certain things. But so much more now, it's just when it comes up, if it's something that I know I don't like, I'm like, well, Divine Mother has a plan and I know she has my back and I just move forward. And so that, ability to recognize when something is actually happening for your good and feeling good about it, even though that part of your ego doesn't like it, is part of the spiritual growth process. Now, here again, the important reason why it's so important for you to embrace the whole concept of spiritual growth is because if you're not doing it, you're going against your natural hardwiring and you will forever feel conflicted, unhappy with your life, feeling like something's missing or no meaning. You might have more frustration. Anytime you see your life getting harder, it's your higher power, your spirit guides trying to get you to step into your spiritual growth. And so that's why it's so important, because if you don't do it, you're going against the way you're naturally wired, the way why you're here on the planet, and so you start to suffer and you'll have challenges in your life that you just can't even understand why, because you are maybe not wanting to go to the next step and you want to keep it back in the past. All right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, greatness is within you. It's time to let it out. Blessings.